Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of our Beyond Stigma series focusing on Middle Eastern and North African representation in the media, where we delve into discussions surrounding different identities and experiences of those who have worked in the media and the arts and entertainment industries. Today we are joined by a very special guest, Yasmeen Scott. Yasmeen is a British Emirati actor based in London. She was raised in the UAE, trained in London with dual nationality, and has heritage of Black Emirati and English ethnicity. Yasmine has been working with CSM since March 2020 and has recently completed a training course with the Unseen Drama since September 2020 and has appeared in an online theatre Shakespeare series by feminist collectives HER Productions and Unseemly Women. Her latest work was a supporting role in British Arabic multilingual feature film in its post-production from Iraqi British writer-director Ja'far Abd Al Hamid. Yasmine, thank you so much for being here today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited.
Oh, no problem. I look forward to having this discussion with you. So the first question we've been asking all of our guests is a bit of a generic one, but what made you want to pursue a career in this industry?
So I've always been quite a creative person, a performer, I guess you could say. Growing up, I kind of dipped my toe in anything that was like being on stage, whether it was dancing or theatre productions, but they were very much in terms of like acting was just like extracurricular activities because I never had the opportunity to do it more professionally or even through school, unfortunately, because I went to quite an academic school, international school in the UAE. And I loved film and TV, and just growing up, it was like such escapism for me. And I just used to dream about what it was like to have all these other lives and kind of live in a fantasy world, which sounds kind of strange, but I realized the only access to that would be through acting. So that what kind of drew me into it, and it always stayed with me. And as I got older, I didn't obviously act, but I got to a stage in my early 20s when I thought, if I don't pursue this now, I'm never going to be able to. So why don't I just try? So I kind of like left everything behind, and well, I didn't leave everything behind. I gradually started training and then got into the industry that way.
I mean, that's amazing. And it's nice to hear how, despite the fact that you had a different kind of background and you wasn't sure about going into this industry, in the end you did, and you put that aside and did it anyway. Because I feel like a lot of people that want to be in this industry get so scared and so worried, like, what if I don't make it? What if I don't get the roles I want? What if I don't get into, the films I want to get into? And the thought completely stops them from getting into it in the first place. So I think it's great that you managed to overcome those kind of worries and still went for it anyway.
Yeah, definitely. And it is such a scary industry, especially if you don't know where to start or you've never done it at school. You just think that it's completely inaccessible. But I think I was just living in London and working, and I just thought, like, if there was anywhere you could pursue it, it would be here. I never would have thought you could pursue it back in the Middle East, which actually you can, obviously. But yeah, it's so scary, and like, if you have no idea where to start, it's quite a long process to kind of start from scratch, especially in your 20s.
Yeah, exactly. And you say you thought you couldn't do it back in the UAE. Why do you think you had that thought?
Just because I never did it at school, and it wasn't like something that was talked. Film and TV very much out there was very much, it was like a dream world. It wasn't something that anyone had access to. And I know that they have now, obviously in today's day and age, they have productions based out there and production companies, but back in the 90s and the early noughties, it just wasn't involved in that part of the world, in the country that I was in anyway. And also I didn't speak Arabic growing up, so if I wanted to be an actor in the Middle East, I wouldn't have been able to, because all of the Arabic productions actually coming out of the Middle East were all in Arabic. So it's just like quite a reach to imagine yourself doing.
And going off from the first question, it's kind of related, but who are your biggest role models, if you have any anyway, in the industry?
Probably at the moment, Riz Ahmed. I really respect the work that he's done up until this point. I really like that he cares a lot about Muslim representation. He just seems like a very genuine person who not only is an incredible actor and writer, but also just an advocate for representation, especially for the, like I said, the Muslim community. So he's probably up there, and I've had the pleasure of meeting him, and he is such a nice person. And also I should say some women. There's plenty of women out there. Viola Davis, I love her. I love that she's had such a long career and it's still going and thriving, and I just feel like we still even haven't seen her peak yet, which is amazing in terms of Black representation and Black women and older women as well. So she's definitely someone I look up to in the industry.
I mean, I think it's so interesting that you say Riz Ahmed, and the fact that you've met him, that's so cool. But it's interesting because I know recently he's come out and spoke a lot about Muslim representation in the media, and it's like at the same time as this series.
But yeah, you're right. I was reading a lot about what he was talking about, and the clips he's kind of shared, especially on social media, where he's trying to get like more of a push in terms of Muslim representation and positive Muslim representation, and how it matters not just for the audience and people who are seeing it, but roles on TV and in film do affect entire stereotypes in the world globally. So it's definitely important in that respect.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's great what he's doing, because, you know, he got nominated for an Oscar this year, and, you know, he's really blowing up in the industry. And I think he has such a big platform now, especially to talk about these things. And it's so great that he is, because obviously it is a big issue, and that's why we're here today and talking about all of this.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so going off from that, actually, what do you think about the current representation of MENA individuals in the media?
I personally haven't seen very accurate representation, or positive representation. I think that a lot of the time the representation that people from the region get would be in terms of war, in terms of refugees, and in terms of terrorism. And again, that also kind of filters out into Muslim representation too. So it's quite negative what we see from people from the Middle East and North Africa, and it's disheartening, I think, for people from the region, because our stories are never told. It's such a rich, diverse culture. There's so many countries involved, and there's so many elements to it, and so many levels of our culture that are completely washed out with just negativity. So I'd definitely love to see some more truthful representation. One of my favorite shows, Rami, is a great example of the representation that I would like to see more of, although it can be controversial to people in the region. I think that it does show another side, especially for our generation, and how we live in the West, for instance, but still hold on to our culture and our religion, but in different ways, and how it can be really personal, and the influences of the West as well, and how we're just normal, trying to figure it all out the same way every other culture is, but we never get that kind of airtime. So I want to see more like Rami out there, and also it's hilarious.
Yeah, I love that show as well. And most people you speak to from this region all watch that show and all have so much respect for it. And I think it just goes back to what you were saying, the fact that it's just about, a Middle Eastern, North African guy living in the West, and all the, things he goes through. And we can relate to that because we also live in the West and we have all these different cultures and, you know, sometimes go back home, come back. And it's just like so nice to be able to relate to something like that because it's just not there. Like you said, it's not there. And if there is any sort of representation, it's usually negative, like you said, or it's about oppression. And, you know, we've definitely talked about this on this series, and it's fine to talk about these things, especially we can't ignore that oppression happens everywhere, right?
Exactly, yeah.
But that's the point. It happens everywhere. Why is it the minute that it's a MENA story, it's all about oppression, it's all about negativity and very horrible stereotypes? Why can't it just be a normal story about a normal family living in America, living in the UK that's from this background? I just don't get it. I just don't.
Yeah, I completely agree. It just like it's important for me coming from an Arab Muslim background because it also gives representation for those of us who may not be as conservative. One of the things, obviously, coming from an Islamic background is that we are a lot more conservative, I guess, than people in the West at times. And people really hold on to religion. And you kind of feel shame when you let go of some religious aspects to live more Western. And there are a lot of us who might not be practicing Muslims, who are culturally identify as Muslim, that have progressed in that way, in the manner that can be represented, for instance, on Rami. And there's the fear that we might also feel demonized from our own people for being like that too, because I definitely have that fear myself, and like even comments on Instagram from strangers about why do you drink, you're Muslim, things like that. So I feel like the representation isn't just important for the Western world, but it's also important for people in the Middle East too, so that we can start to accept that there are so many variations of us and that it's okay.
Yeah, that's a really, really interesting perspective. And I'd not really thought about that before. The fact that, you know, the media that we see and the media representation we see is for, you know, the West and for people that see us very negatively, but also for the people back home who may need to know more about how we live here. I think that's so true and so important. And I definitely relate as well to that, you know, living in the UK, being Iranian, you know, there's that confusion of where do I fit in? Like, do I have to be very conservative as well, or do I be more Western? And I think having that representation kind of helps you a little bit as well. And yeah, I think that's really, really important. I hadn't thought about that. And would you say, with going back to, you know, religion, and you know, you said that's is something that you're always worried about or that you fear as well, has that affected how, you know, the roles you want to play in the future, or your entire work in this industry? Do you think it affects you at the moment, having these thoughts?
Yeah, it definitely plays into some decisions, or even just like thoughts that I have about future decisions. If I have castings where they say, you know, this requires nudity or there's a sex scene, the first fear that comes into my head isn't, am I scared to be naked in front of people? Obviously that's a fear, general fear for everyone, but it's like, if I did that on screen, coming from a Muslim background, am I going to be demonized by my own people? Am I going to shame myself? How would it be received? Because we are quite conservative, and yeah, it's a huge factor into my thoughts when it comes to roles that require things to do with nudity or sex scenes. I don't want to be demonized, obviously, by my own community. So that definitely plays into it. But at the same time, I think it's important to have more representation of people from the MENA region taking roles where they do require that, and we're okay doing it, because like we said before, there's a balance of us who live in the West who do have more of a Western lifestyle where that doesn't bother us, like owning more of our bodies, being more sexualized, things like that are progressive to us and they're okay with us. So it's definitely a juggle, and it's something that came up quite recently just by commenting on an Instagram post on Yalla Let's Talk Instagram page, where they had shown a clip of Mia Khalifa, and some of the comments were like, oh, I'm really disgusted that you would post her on here, I'm going to unfollow. There was like various comments, and I quoted Mona El Tawani about the Middle East needing a sexual revolution, and I referenced that, saying, reading the comments, definitely the Middle East needs a sexual revolution. And I had like quite a few comments like agreeing with me, saying I completely support this idea. And then there was obviously a handful of people saying like, how dare you, this is whorism, this is disgusting, we don't want this in our region, mind your own business, things like that. And it just again triggered me, because I was like, we're always going to have, it's always going to be kind of split, I think, where we'll have such a big population of people from the region who just aren't ready for that yet, but we need more representation in order to help them see that it's okay.
I think that's so interesting, but it's also so sad, because you know, it kind of makes it so difficult for, you know, as a MENA actor in this industry, it's already so hard fighting the stereotypes and trying to get those roles that you want, and then also having to deal with this on the side of, okay, if I get this role, what are people back home going to think? What are people on the internet going to think? And we can't lie, you know, at the end of the day, social media is so big, and everyone has this platform and ability to make sometimes really horrible, nasty comments. And you know, as an actor, obviously you're always going to get comments, but it's still very negative, and it can still really affect you and your mental health and your future as well in the industry. But I don't know, it's a tricky one, because it's a very cultural thing, isn't it? Like, you have to change the mindset of all these people, and it's like, how do you do that? How do you even start with that? I've never thought about that before.
It's really difficult, and on the one hand you'll have that side of comments that you think about, and then you'll have comments from people who are actually white and from the West, who will say something like that in almost like a mocking way, like, are you even allowed to drive, or are you even allowed to speak to men? Like, it's weird how you can have people from your own community and people who aren't part of your community essentially arguing or using the same rhetoric in a different way for a different reason, in a negative way aimed at you. So it's like you kind of feel like torn. You're like, I don't understand which way I'm supposed to go here.
Oh no, that's horrible, and I'm sorry like that happens to, you know, to you or to anyone, because it's not a nice thing to go through. I think already actors and anyone in that industry gets a lot of unnecessary comments thrown at them, and you don't need this on top of it. When you think about most actors and MENA performers from this region, I can't even think of people, I can't really think of anyone that does like nude scenes or anything like that. And I wonder if it's because of the same thing that you're mentioning, and of the fear that the criticism, and I think it goes back to, you know, feminism and this emerging topic of, you know, being able to express yourself and being able to do things that make you feel confident without getting that criticism from mostly men.
It is mostly men as well. It's terrible, and it is very strange. I find like criticism, especially from men from the MENA region, if they have something wrong with it, it's usually like a two-way street. Even if they themselves aren't very conservative, they expect women to be.
Exactly.
So that's obviously something that plays into like the fear of big criticism. It's mainly the fear of criticism from men, because I bet I rarely would have any comments from a woman.
You kind of touched on it, but what have your own experiences been like as a MENA individual working in this industry?
When I first got into acting, I would say that I probably wasn't thinking about it through the lens of, let's say, the Western world or white professionals. So I thought I was just going to enter the industry and go up for loads of roles without kind of that much obstacles in terms of casting. However, after I started training and we got asked to like kind of make a list of the ethnicities that we would tick off as ours or that we could pass for, that's when I started to realize, oh, you actually have to like fit a box of your casting ethnicity. So you don't just go for everything. I know that I can be white passing in the way that I can look Spanish.
Right.
So if my hair's straight a lot of the time, or during the winter when my skin's a bit lighter, and if they were to say that I'm Spanish, I could be Spanish. When it's summertime, if my hair's curly and my skin's a lot darker, I'm less likely to go up for roles in that kind of field. And then I was told that I actually have a niche, which is being Arab, and to work on my Arabic, and that's kind of what would make me more attractive or kind of make me break out, is to focus more on roles for Arabs, which to me was so strange, because it was like saying you're different from everyone else because you fit this box that a lot of people don't fit into. So therefore, whenever those roles come up, that's what you're going to go for. That's your niche. That's what you should focus on. And through that, you should also don't ever straighten your hair, keep it curly, just look as ethnic as you can, basically, which was strange because I spent my whole life not wanting to do that. Obviously, unfortunately, we are indoctrinated into believing like a Western beauty standard, which everyone experiences. So I spent my whole life kind of trying to look as white as I can. And then all of a sudden, obviously, as I got older, I became more comfortable in myself, but I was being told by agents and professionals to look as ethnic as I can, which was quite strange. It has so many negatives, but a positive that I can take from it is the fact that it did make me start to accept myself for who I was, rather than wanting to Eurocentricize myself. So from that, there is a positive for me, that I did start to identify more with my culture and looking like I was from my cultural background too, even though I know that I have quite a mixed look, and I always get ethnically ambiguous, which is the favorite term. Favorite term that I get. But yeah, that's kind of been my experience in terms of like casting. In terms of auditioning, I do get a lot of Middle Eastern castings. Majority are refugee characters. I've had a couple of terrorist characters, unfortunately Palestinian terrorists. Questionable storylines there. So yeah, it's been quite a strange kind of journey with seeing what I get put up for, and when I get asked to cast for these sort of roles, seeing what the roles, storylines are. I'm grateful though that I have really good agents that don't only put me up for that. So luckily it's not the only thing that I get, but it's definitely the majority of Arab roles will be along that kind of storyline.
Yeah, but you know, that's not to do with you looking Arab. It's the fact that the roles and the stories that are being put out there are unfortunately just, you know, terrorists and refugees. But you know, I think it's interesting that you say, because I think it's true, you know, the fact that you've been told to look more ethnic and not straighten your hair. It's, you know, as someone, because I know what you mean, because I have curly hair looking straightened right now, but you know, especially as a kid, you go through that phase of like, oh, I need to look the way everyone at school looks. I need to straighten my hair. I need to like look a certain way. So the fact that you now feel comfortable in your own shoes and your, you know, the way you look, I think that's great. But at the same time, you know, being boxed as well. How does that feel? Like, do you feel like you can't go for, yeah, I mean, I know you said you can go for like Spanish and stuff like that, but would you ever, do you think, be able to do a role that's like English or American, for example? Because
I don't think that I would be the first choice for that, no. And it does cross my mind a lot. Like I don't see what the side of the casting when I don't see what roles I get put into in terms of like my agents applying me for roles, and which ones kind of get rejected and based on how I look. I also don't see unfortunately the feedback of why I might not necessarily get put forward for an Arab role, whether I don't look Arab enough for that or not. But yeah, it definitely, you do feel like you're boxed. You feel like majority of your castings are because of you're Middle Eastern, and there's probably not enough Middle Eastern actors out there to fit those roles. Therefore, they just send them all to you, and they'll just all be, like I said, the refugee or the terrorist kind of role, or the Muslim woman. So yeah, it does feel, it's strange, like feeling like you are just there to tick a box for for representation or for diversity even. And it's hopefully something that changes in the industry, but it's really hard to kind of navigate and see where it's going to go, especially now. Things are kind of changing, but in terms of like MENA representation, it's a lot slower, unfortunately.
Yeah. I you know, from other discussions as well, they all have said, you know, diversity is becoming better, but not the type of diversity that focuses on MENA people as well. And hopefully that changes, you know, hopefully by having discussions like this, people have more information about this and know what it kind of feels like to have to go through all of this.
I've played a Muslim Arab woman in a play, like a fringe theatre play, which was like a courthouse about the 7/7 bombing. So I actually was playing the clerk of the court. So that was a good representation in terms of taking away from the story and putting more into one of the important roles in the courthouse. Yeah, so the roles kind of, when it comes to when you get castings for refugees or terrorists, they're usually not like, the refugee could be the main character, but they're not. They're usually the main character is going to be the white person, and you're kind of the supporting story for their story. It's never actually focusing on you.
Right.
Yeah.
But you know, I think as an actor, especially making it into the industry, you're keen to just do anything kind of to get that experience and have that on your spotlight profile and everything. So it makes sense as to why people do it anyway, because you need the experience, you need the recognition.
That's exactly it. Because obviously if I had the choice, I wouldn't want to be put up for roles like that. But so early in my career, I'm just edging towards any kind of role I can get in order to keep active, keep my credits going, get paid. So you can't afford to turn down these roles, even though you want to. You just can't afford to. And it's so frustrating, because you're like, oh, another, like, how many times are they going to tell this story? But you can't turn it down.
Yeah.
And even the one where it was like the Palestinian terrorist audition, it's like, it's completely against my ethics, but I'm like, do I just audition and then find out later what the script says if I get through this round? Because they don't give you enough anyway to really judge what's going on.
Right.
So yeah, I think that so many people from other backgrounds, whether they're Black or from the MENA region, all face this kind of stereotype issue when it comes to casting, where we get these roles that we feel are completely inappropriate and don't represent us, but we fill them because they dominate the industry and they're the only work that we can get at the moment. So it's like you're juggling your ethics with the fact that you're trying to pursue a career that is completely against you.
Yeah. But that's the thing, that's not even your fault. It's what are you supposed to do? Because if you don't go for them, when there's no main roles for people from a MENA background that don't talk about migrants and refugees and all this kind of stuff, then it just means that you're not going to do any acting at all, and it's not something you're like you were saying at the beginning, you wanted to come into this industry but you were scared, and how I was saying a lot of people have that fear. If you come into this industry and don't play these roles either and don't do anything, then you go back to, oh, why did I even bother coming into this industry? I was right in the first place. I shouldn't have done this. So in order to avoid that, and in order to avoid the overthinking and the stress behind that, you have to play these roles. And that, again, that's not on you guys or the actors. It's the fact that there's no stories out there, there's no good representation and positivity. So what can you do? There's nothing you can do.
Exactly. You just have to keep going until eventually you get to a point where you can choose your roles. And that definitely falls into, like, for all people from different ethnic backgrounds, we're all kind of doing the same thing. We're just trying to get as far ahead in our career so we can get to the point where we can say no to those types of roles and that kind of representation. But until we get there, there isn't really much other roles for us, unfortunately, which, like you said, isn't our fault. So it's just a weird cycle.
Well, hopefully it's a cycle that will hopefully break eventually, and you can find the roles that you want to do. But speaking of roles, I mean, you've done a lot of broad range of work, and I assume you've done work in different countries as well, for depending on the roles you played. Have you noticed any differences in terms of A, representation, but B, kind of the treatment you get as a MENA actor within the different regions that you worked in?
Mm-hmm. So I'd say probably when I went for castings in the Middle East, in Dubai, I usually get told that I don't look Arab. I don't look Emirati. I don't look Emirati enough to be put forward for the Arab castings out there. Right. Which is obviously strange because, when you're from the country and you're going to casting for it and they say, sorry, you don't look enough of the country that you're from, then that's quite strange. But then that plays into a lot of issues, I think, in the Middle East when it comes to the fact that people come in all different shapes and sizes and colours. But they have, like, their ideal classic look,
right?
And in the Gulf, in the UAE, it's very much kind of representation of what, like, the ruling family look like, right? And if you don't kind of fit that box, say if you're like a black Emirati or black Arab, you don't get shown because they want you to look that type of Arab and not the other type of Arab, which is so diverse. And I think that problem as well then extends to the representation in the West of what Arabs also look like too, because they also have that box that they believe that's how they look. And if you don't look like that, then you don't represent it. And again, I'm having to say all the time, if I talk about, for instance, my dad's ethnicity, they'll be like, but he doesn't look Arab. Why is he black? Or, how is he black and Arab? There's this weird standard of what an Arab should look like. And everyone else who doesn't look like that can't be Arab. So it is really strange. I think that the castings I go up for here, I actually haven't had that many comments about not looking Arab enough. Luckily. But I think that the productions, for instance, the feature that I was on, which was almost an entirely Arab cast, were all from different regions. So we were already aware that there are different looks to it. So I wasn't questioned on how I looked because it was already an understanding that Arabs can look so different. And there's so many different countries within the Middle East, within North Africa. And through that, there's such a cocktail of looks. So it definitely, I definitely get comments probably from people saying that I don't look Arab. I look South American.
Right.
But again, that might be at a casting for a commercial, but they will basically box tick that you can be Middle Eastern and South American and Mediterranean or Southeast Asian or so they're basically saying we want anyone who's not Caucasian to come, who's not Caucasian and not Black apparently, but everyone else can come to this casting. So then if you're talking about where you're from, then they might be like, oh, I didn't think that you were Arab, I thought you were like South American. And then I have to go into the explanation of why I look the way I look. And actually, if you go through the Middle East, if you go to North Africa, you will see a lot of different types of people who look very different. You even see blonde, blue-eyed, pale people, you see Black people, you see people with curly hair, you see gingers, like there's so many different looks. So there's definitely some box that needs to be smashed up and broken, both in the Middle East and here, for representation of how we're supposed to look.
Because you would assume, being from where you are, you know, where you were born and raised, you'd think that you would have it easier in terms of getting roles where they don't tell you don't actually look like you're from here. But, you know, it's interesting because I feel like a lot of countries in the MENA region might experience this. But I think talking about, you know, the fact that you've worked with quite a lot of people from that region, and is that on your movie that's coming out with Ja'far Abd Al Hamid?
Yeah. So on that production, we're all kind of British based, and kind of a mixture of people from Iraq, Syria, both Muslim and non-Muslim backgrounds as well, myself. Even behind the scenes, there was in the production a mixed kind of ethnic background there too, like Saudi even. So it was such a joy to work on, and it really reminded me of home and just made me happy and be like, I love our culture, because when we're celebrating it in a script which is funny, which is like laughing with us, and highlighting kind of the joys of our culture and bringing us together, it just reminded me of what I want to be a part of when it does come to the representation, and doing it right and doing it in a way that makes you feel good. And that's ideally what we need more of in terms of like film and TV, the representation that shows us in a positive way and also makes us feel great, both for people who are the audience who may not necessarily be from the MENA region, but also especially for people who are in the MENA region.
Yeah, I think that's so important because, you know, unfortunately, like it's horrible to say it, but I feel like sometimes being from this region and always being portrayed so negatively, whether it's in the news, whether it's in like movies, TV shows, whatever it is, when you're always facing these stereotypes and this negativity, there comes a time where you sometimes might feel like, oh, why am I from this region? There's nothing good at, like, you know, and a lot of people, especially young people growing up here, they may feel like ashamed of where they're from, and may not want to know more about their culture and their background. And that's really sad because, like you said, when you're all together and you see the beauty of all of it and how rich a culture is and how fun it is to be all together. So, you know, even as a point of view of an audience member, like watching this, it's important to see that representation there, which is positive because it affects you and how you view your own culture. Like, forget about what everyone else thinks, but if you yourself are ashamed of where you're from sometimes, or if you feel very negatively about yourself, that's just so horrible. So it's nice to see that you managed to work with people from that region and from your background and how positive it was for you.
Yeah, definitely. And I definitely think it does make a difference to people who watch film and TV from the region, because I've seen comments online before where they'll be talking about actors as being haram because they partake in the industry, and the industry gives such bad like reputation towards people from the region. So therefore it kind of alienates people even more. So at least if we had the representation going, then it wouldn't alienate people, and there wouldn't be such a bad reputation for us as actors as well, because we wouldn't be partaking on something that was seen to be so kind of detrimental to our own people.
People think you're contributing to something that's so negative, but that's not the point. The point is that you're trying to bring the positivity out of it by working in this industry, by talking about these things, and making sure that representation is there, that these things will change. If you ignore it and don't become an actor, or don't go into this industry, it probably will stay like this for the entire future. So I think it's important to still come into this industry with the view of changing things and hoping for the best, because otherwise if we don't do it, if you guys don't do it, then who is
who's going to do it? Like we're basically the voices in the industry that can tell the stories eventually. Exactly. And if we all take a step back, then the same people who've been telling the stories which are negative and inaccurate are going to continue, and then it's never going to change. So there definitely needs to be that understanding that unless we get into the industry, how will the stories or the representation that's being shown ever change? Because like we see with Riz Ahmed leading that initiative for Muslim representation, the more people who are aware of it from backgrounds such as Riz Ahmed, where he's from a Muslim background and he cares about it, he's now in a place in his career where he can talk about it and start to bring other people on and bring that awareness. So that's where you hope that you could go to. Well, certainly I do, because it does matter to me. That kind of representation matters a lot. And I think that it would get to a point in my career where I would be torn by what I was contributing into the industry.
Yeah, exactly. And also, I think there's a big issue when it comes to there not being enough writers, especially in the industry, from MENA backgrounds. And even if there is, they don't get the attention they deserve in order to put these stories out there and get the funding to produce these sorts of movies and TV shows. So by having people from the MENA region speaking about it and doing what you're doing, you're encouraging people that are looking to go into this industry to actually come in there and do what they need to do. And that's so important, I think, for the future generation, the kids now that are now looking at you guys on the screen, to know what to do and to be encouraged to go towards the career they want to have.
Yeah, absolutely.
And speaking of kind of education, and I know you've done some training and you've done work at the Identity School of Acting. Do you want to tell us a bit about your experiences there? So I know quite a few people on this series also went there, which is really interesting. So what kind of experiences do you have there, and did they talk a lot about this kind of topic or diversity in general because of that?
You definitely get spoken to about it at the induction, and there is like an atmosphere where it's about it, that it matters, representation matters. So definitely going to that school, I think it felt more inclusive than if I were to go to one of the other drama schools, for various reasons, not just on my race, but also on my financial background. Obviously, when you're not from quite a financially privileged background in terms of acting as well, that definitely plays into it. And drama schools seem to be quite inaccessible. And there's kind of like a bubble around them that you just don't think that you can ever access unless you kind of fit the box of what they want an actor to represent. Obviously, there's some initiatives that are changing that at the moment, but yeah, definitely when I was training, identity was seen as more to be attractive because it was more inclusive. It was definitely more inclusive. And when I went there was people, it was diverse. There was people from all over there. There was actors from various different backgrounds, various different ages, complete mix between men and women. there was different classes. There was middle class, working class, but majority probably are working class who go there as well, which is great. So yeah, it is definitely a factor when you're there. You feel like to them representation matters.
Right.
So you feel more inclusive in that. However, I do think that there could be a step further in kind of preparing you for the industry in terms of the representation and the reality of the representation. Right. So it almost touches on it to the point where you're comfortable and you don't realize that when you go into the industry, it's a lot harsher.
Right. So you feel like because you were surrounded by people from different backgrounds, you know, both in terms of financially, you know, ethnicity and gender, you feel like when you came out of it, you thought the industry was going to be inclusive and have all sorts of people, but actually it wasn't as nice.
Yeah. And then obviously when you dig a little bit deeper and you start to read up and hear stories of people's experiences and other actors' experiences and writers, that's when you start to realize, oh, okay, it's a lot harder than I thought. Right. And it's a lot less broad than I thought it was going to be. But since I trained and now, it's definitely growing in the right direction.
You know, as a closing question that I've been asking everyone, what would you like to see be done in the future to ensure better MENA representation in the industry?
I want to see more initiatives which focus on the positive representation of MENA characters. I think that this needs to come into the writing. I think that it needs to start at the very top from the funding point of view, and we need the support. We don't just need like actors to be voicing this. We need people who are directing, people who are writing, producing, people who are giving the money to these projects, everyone to kind of care. Because unless we have the support from people who are not in the region for the representation, then we're not actually going to get the representation. We're just voicing our opinions and maybe even pushing people away. So it needs to start at the top, but we need to educate people on why the representation matters and how it does affect kind of like the global political climate. It sounds crazy, but it actually does. Film and TV is there for our entertainment, but at the end of the day, the representation is global and it has an impact on everyone's ideas and your assumptions of people. And if our representation is consistently negative and aggressive, then that's going to feed into politics, and it's going to feed into racism and Islamophobia, and it needs to have more discussion from the very top with support. So it just needs to change across the board, kind of from the top all the way down to the actors.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The power the media holds is crazy, and it is often used as a political tool as well. Like, we can't deny it. It is, and you know, like what you're saying, it's important to get that correct representation because it affects everybody around the world, and we can't deny it as well. Western media, especially, it's very, very powerful, and it you know, everyone around the world watches American shows and movies and English shows and movies, so they have a big responsibility. Really,
they do, definitely. And America does, like you say, it dominates kind of the global platform when it comes to the media. And if they're only ever putting out films about the wars in the Middle East, then people are just always going to have this idea of Arabs are terrorists, or Muslims are terrorists, or anyone from the region are terrorist, or Iran is a big nuclear terrorist country. Like, it's consistently insanely negative, and we need to change it. We need to normalize the fact that we are just like everybody else. We love our culture, we have religion just like everyone else, but we also are just human beings. And we're such a big population, and there's so many different levels to us, and there's so many different cultures, and it's so rich, and there's so much to celebrate. and we need to start celebrating it.
100%. I completely agree. That's a lovely note to end on. We need to start celebrating it. We really do. So yeah, thank you so much for being here today and for this discussion.
Thank you for having me.
That's okay. I really enjoyed this discussion, and I hope you did too. Thank you for your time. I will definitely put Yasmeen's social media handles in the description box below, so definitely give her a follow and check out her amazing work as well. Yasmeen, thank you again, and I hope to speak to you again in the near future.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.